Dark Souls is a video game released in 2011. Oh, I don't need to explain this. Puppy Love is a modern masterpiece released for the Wii in 2000. When Dark Souls released in 2011, it became not only an instant classic as one of the best games of all time, but also a cultural phenomenon.
Hello everybody and welcome to the inaugural episode of my Dark Souls Let's Play.
Dark Soul, which is a very dark, death-laden video game on PlayStation and other kind of video type things.
If you were online back then, I'm sure I don't have to tell you how suddenly everything, everywhere was Dark Souls. At the center of this conversation was the game's difficulty, a conversation which ripples are still felt to this day. This has been documented and analyzed to hell and back already by 1,000 other video essays, so I'm not bothering. Even if they all get it wrong every time. Okay, it sounds kinda fun, let's do it a bit. Video games are still a very young art form, which means we're still trying to figure out language to talk about complex aspects like difficulty. A word like hard is used to mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, who themselves have varying skill sets and familiarity with the medium. Dark Souls is no doubt a hard game, but I don't think it's necessarily difficult in the ways people think it is, or the ways people express the way they think it is. This is of course coupled with a social aspect and stigma attached to the Souls games, that has no doubt been helped by Bandai Namco's marketing and the community itself, but I'm getting ahead of myself, more on that later. Personally, the two words I would use to describe Dark Souls are hostile and punishing. To articulate what I mean by this, it's best to look at the way it's itself articulated in-game, through the combat design, level design, and the structure that envelops them. Dark Souls combat is governed by a stamina resource system. Actions like attacking, blocking attacks, and dodging attacks all consume stamina, and the bar refills itself back up when it's not being consumed. This system, of course, adds strategic and resource management elements to the combat, but a thing I want to point out is how it slows the game down. You have a limited number of actions before you can't act anymore, and since defensive mechanics require stamina as well, at some point you're gonna have to let go of the offense to safely regen stamina. This, with the help of other more obscure mechanics like poise, creates an implicit pacing to each encounter, and it's why a lot of people call Dark Souls fake turn-based combat. Of course, you're able to self-direct how to use your stamina, which allows for multiple playstyles to shine depending on the kind of enemy you're fighting, the kind of player you are, or the kind of character you're playing. Dark Souls is an RPG after all. Running out of stamina is bad, like really bad, and because you're always a couple mistakes away from being in that position, it adds a constant sense of tension and weight to every interaction. This is exponentially multiplied since pretty much every action like attacks, dodges, and even heals are committal and cannot be cancelled out of. You're leaving yourself open to counterattack every time you mess up. It goes without saying that this system is good. So good that it served as the basis for every action game FromSoft has done since Demon's Souls, and seemingly every other action game everyone else has done since, which is, well, you know. Just gonna dodge around that one cause I don't wanna get into it right now, and it sounds like a pretty good topic for a future video, so let's move on to the level design. It's what I would say if I was an idiot. Listen, the level design in Dark Souls is amazing, layered, deep with secrets, and really fun to explore, but fully entangling that would itself take a half-hour long video I'm just not willing to make. And that's not even accounting for the interconnected world design. Besides, I'm sure there's other videos specifically about it that are better than the one I could make. I don't know, I don't watch YouTube. So let's instead just move on to the more relevant aspects of it I wanna get to, that being enemy placement. Lordran is crawling with these guys, and they're not just hanging around either. They're ambushing you and laying traps, setting up a brawl in the open while you get sniped, choke points to trap you in, pincer attacks. These environments were meticulously crafted to hold these enemies. They didn't just create a map and then throw in some enemy prefabs after the fact. There's very deliberate pacing and escalation as you move from one encounter to the next. This leads to this wonderful feeling that the game designers are constantly out to get you. It's like there's this really cheeky DM watching over you like God, thinking of ways to fuck with you. It's great. And this constantly encourages you to try some more underhanded tactics of your own to get the leg up on them. Getting through these environments is really tense and scary. A lot of people find their first playthrough of Dark Souls anxiety inducing, and this is a big reason why. When I first played this game while in high school, it fucked my brain up. I couldn't sleep for 2 days and I had this constant haze over my thoughts. I can still vividly feel it, it's fucked. And of course I got cursed by the basilisks in the depths and puked into the toilet. This world is not a nice place and wants you dead, and in the game too. But this is exactly why it feels so good when you find a bonfire and exhale as you cozy up to this magical flame and gather your thoughts.
If the game's got that tension, then the game also gets that relief.
Now that we understand how the game's punishing and how it's hostile, let's take a look at the structure that holds these two design caterpillars as it morphs into a beautiful adventure-shaped butterfly. Why did I write this? Dark Souls world is this complex Metroidvania-esque Jenga tower that connects the levels together, but progression within each level is surprisingly straightforward and arcadey. Fight through the level, maybe find a couple of checkpoints or shortcuts along the way, and finally fight a boss. The setup itself is simple, so to understand why it works so well, let's instead take a walk through the Undead Asylum, the game's tutorial level.
Start your adventure here!
You wake up stuck in jail, homeboy throws you the key out on a corpse. Why did he do that? You don't really know what's going on, there's a prophecy of the undead or something?
Nato unleashed a miasma of death and disease.
Anyway, you walk. It's a normal day under capitalism. Ladder time, yay! Touch the fire bone, dramatically open the door. Look, it's the exit! You're about to leave and wahaha, you little
Memory card.
If you try to fight this little guy, you're not gonna get far because you have a little dinky broken sword and you just started the game, so you're not great at it. The answer to this problem as positioned by the game is fucking run. The first boss in the game you have to run from. Please take notes, this will be on the test. Anyway, there's a dude being annoying with a bow, so grab your shield and go at him. Look, it's almost like the game is teaching you stuff through the level design, like what the? He runs away, so he's about as smart as you are. And oh hey, that's the cool sword I picked on the character creator. The game is yelling kill, 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 kill. So of course you kill. You don't know what this funky fog is, but you learn you can go through it. Cool! You go down here and... wait, is that a...
shortcut?
Yeah, so those are a thing, get used to that. Now you can go up and yeah, sure,
E102 Gamma!
There's traps everywhere all the time for no reason. Be scared. You're smart, so you go through the hole the bull opened. Homeboy is dying, so he gives you his potions. Why didn't he just drink these? Go up for real now. The three stooges are kinda scary, so make sure you break line of sight with the archer and position yourself properly. Go through some more fog and oh! Hey! How the turntables have turned. Now you're the one getting the drop on the guy. This little tutorial is genius. Of course, it manages to organically introduce the basic mechanics as well as more complex concepts like shortcuts, but it also serves as a microcosm of the bigger world you're about to explore. Everything and everyone is out to get you. It's scary, and if you trip, you're dead. Your only path to success is to outsmart these guys. Run away, set yourself up for success, and outscummy the scummers. Yes, I said scummers with a U, that's a word now, cite me. To see the full payoff of this tutorial though, we'll have to jump ahead around 30 minutes of gameplay. After digging around in Firelink Shrine for a bit and dying to the graveyard skellies, you'll make it to the Undead Burg, the first proper level, where turn after turn you're being kept in check by the cheeky enemy placement I was talking about earlier. Undead Burg is one of the best video games levels like ever, so I do feel kinda bad skipping over it like this, but this video is long enough and I've already shown plenty of footage of it, plus you've played the game, who am I kidding? Anyway, after suffering through the Burg, you make it through to this angelic looking bridge, and of course the game drops a giant bull demon on top of you and throws two archers behind you giving you back shots. This is the first proper boss in the game and it functions as your first exam, but it doesn't ask you to figure out the answer out of thin air. Instead, it asks you to remember what was taught in class. See, I told you this would be on the test. Run away, climb the ladder, dispose of the archers or have them help out, and turn a bad situation into a good one. You've done this before, be confident. His attacks are really pretty manageable and slow. The challenge mostly comes from maneuvering the tight space. The arena you fight in is as important as the bosses themselves. Gwendolyn might be my favorite one. It's a simple challenge but really engaging. Chasing them in this fake infinite hallway as you dodge their projectiles is really fun. And I love how well they're introduced in the game. The boss roster is really diverse, and most of them are super unique. Some have more puzzly design that's great. Priscilla's invisibility is really neat, and following her footsteps in the snow is a great aha moment. You also don't have to fight her and can just walk past. But even besides the more puzzly aspects, boss design is very well considered. I think it's really smart how the game pits you against the two gargoyles before ringing the first bell. It's a really nice way to step up the difficulty and forces you to learn how to fight two enemies at once, which is pretty tough in this game. It also introduces the co-op mechanics with Solaire, so you can partner up and make it an even fight if you want. This is then followed up with ONS as the midpoint challenge in the game. This time, each enemy has their own unique fighting style and patterns you need to consider, which also offers room for strategy. Do you want to focus on Ornstein while Smo is lagging behind, or maybe you'd rather go for Smo since he's a bigger, slower target? The game plays into this by changing the second phase depending on your choice, and even the item drops post-fight, so you might want to try playing it differently next time. Of course, there's more straightforward duels as well, and I believe they work so well specifically because they're not overused, and instead used as punctuation marks and key points during the game. Something I find really interesting is how they are also undermined in some ways. Gwyn is the game's central figure and is constantly built up within item descriptions and NPC dialogue. But then you get to the final boss fight and he's just a husk. A tired skeleton of a man who can do nothing but swing his sword at you. Same goes with Artorias, who's perhaps the second most important character in the story's events. Yet somehow he's nowhere to be seen across the main game. When you finally meet him in the past and find out what happened to him, you get to fight him, but not as the proud knight you've heard tales about, but a broken man who's been corrupted. His legend of stopping the abyss was false all along. He lost. And it's only after you give him a noble death and finish what he started that he gets to have a hero's legacy. It's worth noting these fights are also just very fun because while your opponent is relatively fast, the animations do a very good job of telegraphing the attacks, so you can easily use the skills you've built up to play around them. I think every boss in Dark Souls is worth talking about in some way, and to prove this, I'm gonna heap praise upon one of the most hated bosses in the game, nay, the series. A boss that causes discourse whenever someone as much as utters their name. A boss that goes by the name of the Capra Demon. It's the Capra Demon. I'll be upfront, I am #1 Capra Demon's defender. If Capra Demon has one fan, that's me. But I can't lie to you, this guy sucks. I mean, he asks you to meet him in a cramped, dark back alley, and the second you walk in, he throws his dogs at you. What kind of first date is this? Get his ass off Grindr, sad. This fight is mean, cruel, and maybe even unfair, and trust me, I hate that word. You barely have an instant to make your move to avoid the initial attack, and if you mess it up, chances are you're dead. And I think that's genius. No, I am not kidding. Think about it, some developer had the idea to put this guy in a tiny ass room and then they were like, let's give this guy a leaping overhead smash he's likely to do as you enter the room. And then someone else chimed in and said, let's also put 2 rabid dogs alongside him. It's just so fucking funny. The development team just wants to fuck with you, I love it. Your back is against the wall, literally, but it's not like you're out of options. If you make it past the initial onslaught with a well-timed dodge or some help from poise or a shield, you'll find these steps going up. Since the beginning of the game, you've been taught to love the high ground, so of course you climb up, line the puppies up to make them more manageable and take them down. Once they're gone, you've effectively taken control of the fight. The turntables have turned yet again. Capra Demon is a pretty easy enemy and you can now take him down at your own pace. Bait him to fall down and punish him for chasing you, or fight him out in the open. You can kite him and kill him with magic if you want. You've wrestled control out of the evil DM's hands and proven yourself worthy as the Dark Soul. Okay, not quite. I don't think it's perfect. The execution maybe isn't quite there, but the concept alone is able to carry this boss fight and many others for me. It's worth mentioning that most of these design elements I'm praising were already a thing in Demon Souls, even if in a more raw and unfiltered way. That game also has its own spin on things and unique charm, which is definitely underappreciated. I've chosen to talk about Dark Souls, however, particularly because of how it frames the conversation I want to bring up next. That being how some of these elements have changed from Dark Souls to Elden Ring, and why it might have happened. Before we do, however, I should explain that elements I've praised, particularly some of the more puzzly boss design, weren't and aren't particularly well received by some people. And it's here we have to get back to that social element I brought up earlier. This one is hard to untangle for multiple reasons, and as we move forward, keep in mind I don't have a psychology degree, for whatever that's worth. Dark Souls inherently creates and encourages community with its online systems and design, so it's only natural a strong community would birth from it. But I think everyone understands by now a subset of the Dark Souls community are, for lack of better words, very proud that they beat a game that's considered hard. And no, it's not the kind of accomplishment Miyazaki wanted to instill in the player when they beat a hard boss. This might be because a lot of them were young and at the time of playing had no real accomplishments besides beating a somewhat difficult video game. But I think this is one of the main reasons the perception of the game's difficulty skyrocketed along with the game's popularity. This whole get good thing was everywhere. Everyone was doing this shit. Do not believe anyone telling you it was a loud minority. They are lying to you. Ignoring the obvious conversation of it being silly and toxic and gatekeepy, I just want to point out it's just flat out wrong and very clearly against the game design. Like fuck, we know gamers are media literate, but this is taking things way too far. I mean, this is the game where you're taught to run away from the first boss. But every single thing that directly contradicted this perception of the game got hand-waved away. Tips for beating ONS quickly went from you can summon Solaire to help distract Pikachu to get good. Using in-game mechanics like summoning or spellcasting or even leveling were seen as cheating or outright dismissed as cheating. For the longest time, people thought the quick kill for ceaseless discharge was a glitch and not an intended interaction. And I think one of the main reasons why is because people just kept referring to it as cheese. Like the game that's actively encouraging you and pushing you to be smarter, more cunning, more observant, grow stronger, and try new things, became seen as the skill check, pass your head up against the wall kind of game. This is not a thing of the past either, it's definitely still a thing. To this day, I still see people describe the Dark Souls games as pass your head up against the wall simulator, and like, no. Did we play the same game? Why are you making my favorite game sound like shit? Could you shut up? Dark Souls 2 came out in blah blah blah, you get the gist of it. This game has a bit of a mixed reputation, and while I think it's easy to see why, I feel like it only gets harder to have nuanced conversations about it as time passes. Normally you would expect these things to get better, but it seems like people are sectioned off into either decrying the game as the worst thing ever or ignoring all its flaws and praising it as the best. Hate to be the boring bitch, but Dark Souls 2 is good. It's a pretty disappointing follow-up to what's IMO one of the best games of all time, but like, yeah, no shit. This is as good a time as any to say, I'm about to criticize these games, but I hope it's clear I think all these games are good, and any critiques I have of them come from a well-meaning place as a fan. Please do not dox me. Chances are you already understand DS2's flaws and the troubled development that led to them, but most relevant to what I touched in this video is the enemy placement. Because so much of this is the straight opposite of what I was talking about. Enemies are just sort of thrown around and you can fight them. They don't really seem like part of the level design for the most part. And someone at From clearly agrees with this because a year later they released a new version of the game with wildly different enemy placement. And it managed to still have the exact same problem. You can shuffle enemies around all you want, but if the levels that host them are not themselves considered, then it's kind of a moot point. Overall, SOTFS has as many problems as it fixes and whatever, but I just find its existence kinda baffling. Dark Souls 2 does have some interesting stuff in it though. Like I think they tried to mess with the basic combat feel with life gems being this faster constant heal and throwing 10 enemies at you all the time. It doesn't really work for me, but hey, there are things you can like about Dark Souls 2, okay? The hottest take of 2024. Maybe you like how the character controller and animations feel like shit. Hey, I'm not judging. I for one like the chariot boss a lot. It's pretty neat. Anyway, Bloodborne time. I don't think Bloodborne is necessarily a response to this whole social element I've talked about. I mean, for one, it was in development parallel to DS2, but it might as well be, cause Bloodborne kinda is what a lot of people thought Dark Souls 1 was. It's faster, it's all about direct action. Most bosses are straightforward duels against other hunters or big beasts. There's no shield, so iframe dodging is front and center. And with enemies being this fast and having so many wide multi-hit moves, you have no choice but to get scrappy in there. You may think I'm about to criticize it for all this, but no actually, quite the opposite. Bloodborne is not a Dark Souls game, it's specifically its own new series, so if anything, I appreciate it differentiating itself from Souls. It goes to great lengths to justify its new approach and teaches it to the player really well. And most importantly, it also has the mechanics and system design to accommodate these changes. Your dodge is now a quick step, which feels way better to spam. When you get hit, you can now fight back using the rally system. And you can even parry at range with your gun now. I mean, people still find a way to complain about the Mikolash fight, even though it's one of the greatest things ever, but whatever. I think Bloodborne is as strong a game as DS1, particularly because of how committed it is to its own design ethos. They're just different from Dark Souls. Or they were? My master thesis, Dark Souls 3, more like Bloodborne 2. Alright, so Dark Souls 3 has considerable Bloodborne influence. Like, I remember starting this game up and thinking, damn, you can roll a lot in this one, why is that? Then I fought a couple bosses and well... Enemy and boss design here has changed quite a lot. Tons of wide, fast, multi-hit attacks and charges. Kinda like Bloodborne, only you don't have a fast dodge to help you out. The number of problem-solving bosses has also decreased a lot by this point. And this is when it really started to look to me like From was shaping their games in response to the community. Like they really were trying to make the get good simulator. As people got better at these games, they felt pressure to keep making them harder to satisfy players' perception that these games have to be hard no matter what. With DS3 being the result of that. Don't get me wrong, Dark Souls 3 is a very good game. It's very consistent in quality, it's just kinda uninspired. Like Undead Settlement is one of the best Bloodborne levels they didn't make. Orlando is one of the best Dark Souls levels they already made. Erithil Dungeon something something Latria. Fucking Grand Archives again, okay. The constant fun service is just, as a fan, kinda insulting, honestly. I understand if you feel differently, but damn, it still feels kinda gross to get to a place called Fireting Shrine that's totally not Fireting Shrine to see Andre there, just because. And like the lore is all about everything collapsing from being mixed together time and time again, and it's clearly allegorical to the fact that they didn't want to make fucking Dark Souls games anymore, which is like, I don't think makes it better, but it's certainly a statement. Thankfully, they got the chance to try some new stuff with Sekiro, an action game that doesn't focus on iframing every attack. And yeah, this is what inspired looks like to me. Not gonna dive into this one cause it's a hard left on a lot of the stuff we talked about, which is great. I mean, it's not even an RPG for one, but it's still worth noting From themselves realized they at least needed to experiment with the formula for their combat. Not take anything for granted and question every mechanic they added to their games. Actually, fuck it, just throw everything in there, why not? Disclaimer, Elden Ring is a great game. Please don't call me names, I will tell my mom. This game really is an amalgamation of all their previous projects. And I think a big reason why has to do with the scale of it. I'm not blaming the methods here, I'm all for reusing assets and animations, that is not what I mean. I do however question the concept and sorta the result. For most of my first playthrough, Elden Ring felt amazing, like an evolution of Dark Souls. The adventuring feeling was there, only now given form through the sheer scale of the world. You could go anywhere and find something cool, an interesting story, a beautiful location, a unique item. But the problem with using scale as the main drive for your game is that its luster is gonna wear off eventually. At some point you're gonna reach behind the curtain and see all the shortcuts that were taken to get us here. The bosses being reused starts taking away from the experience. The vast, beautiful open world goes from the prettiest fun thing you've seen to the prettiest annoying thing you've seen. There's a lot of detail and love in virtually every corner of the lands between, but there's just so much of it, traversing it begins to feel like a chore. In Dark Souls and Demon Souls, running around to grab the items I need for my build is always fun and engaging. You're limited by the world layout in some ways, but it's open enough that you have plenty of choice and everything always plays differently enough depending on what you wanna do. In Elden Ring, however, starting a character fills me with dread. Gotta run around to get my golden seeds, my upgrade materials, my tears, my souls, my etc. And like, sure, you don't have to do this. It's an open world game. You don't have to play any single way. You can self-direct. And that's valid enough in a way, but at the end of the day, the role of design is to guide you to have an engaging, intended experience. And I think that's where games like Elden Ring begin to lose me. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were the same way for me. At some point, you'll understand how everything works, and you'll see that the content just can't be that good and has been stripped of nuance and intentionality for the sake of having more of it. And for the record, it's not like Elden Ring doesn't have good quality stuff in it. The major dungeons work as more traditional levels and they're generally great. Exploring them with a new jump is really fun. But even them are made worse by how disconnected everything feels. All the overworld caves and catacombs start blending together. Some have some interesting level design, but most are just pretty bare bones and formulaic. Fight some dudes, find some materials you're never gonna craft stuff with, fight the boss you might have seen 3 times before for a reward you might find useful. During the first playthrough, they mostly stay engaging, but once you know where everything is, why would you ever go to the ones with rewards you don't want? They're just there now. And maybe I'm being unfair, not every game needs to be designed accounting for replaying, and that's fair enough. Outer Wilds is one of the best things ever, and you effectively cannot replay that one, also go play it. But with Outer Wilds, or Dark Souls for that matter, every time I revisit those games and peer back the curtain, it only enhances my appreciation for it, even when I see the not so great parts. With Elden Ring, it's the straight opposite for me, which I found really disappointing because it's the first world in a long time that I found myself really engaged with. But wait, I'm not done bitching yet, cause I gotta talk about the boss design now. So many of these are the Dark Souls 3 thing taken to the extreme. Multi hits, huge fast swipes, and gap closers. But now with horribly paced animations very clearly designed to specifically throw off the timing you've built from playing these games over the years. Watching all these wonderfully understandable attack animations, you've gotten pretty good at predicting when they're gonna hit. And since we're making the hard game for people who want the hard game, we need to make it more difficult by any means necessary. Even if it means having a dude float in the air for a split second after jumping at you. Or hold a wind up key pose for 5 straight seconds to catch your roll. It's all about the dodge roll, after all. So many huge enemies that are just flailing giant multi-hit hitboxes. No matter how many Estus flasks you give me, it won't make it any better. Fucking Morgoth over here has a Tekken moveless with a frame 3 jab and is cancelling into attacks like it's fucking Guilty Gear. Seriously, fuck this boss, man. Like, I'd like to fight him in Devil May Cry or something, not the game where my roll input is low as shit and getting buffered into oblivion. Maybe I'm being overly cynical and silly, but these encounters genuinely stop me from replaying this game. And yeah, sure, quality scale issue or whatever, but it's just not fun. It doesn't give me the sense of mastery I can get from other action games. And I just cannot express with words how upset it makes me when I get hit by all these roll catch and delayed attacks for committing the crime of reading the animation properly. I can understand if people don't fully engage with the way Capra Demon is hard, but to me, bosses like this are as bad as it gets. Believe it or not, I plan to go way harder on this shit, but this video is way too long already and seemingly a lot of people finally caught on and are talking about it. There's multiple videos on YouTube about the boss design in Elden Ring, so I don't know, maybe check those if you're interested. I haven't watched them, so I can't attest to their quality, but I'm sure at least one of these is good. And hey, it's not like there aren't cool, interesting bosses in Elden Ring. Renala is outright one of my favorite FromSoft fights. Radahn is a really cool spectacle, and Rykard is pretty sweet for like a phase and a half, even if it's the 3rd time they've done the Storm Ruler by now. And hey, some of the faster dodge happy fights sometimes work if you get into the flow and the game is merciful enough. All things being said, I'm still excited for Shadows of the Erdtree. For one, historically the DLC in From's games have always been a highlight, and I think the game can shine a lot with a more focused and restrained approach. Although it's priced at $40, so I don't know, maybe it will still be huge and bloated. In any case, I'll be there to check it out. Just like I'll be there to check out whatever From does next. Although I'd prefer it if it was something completely different. If Sekiro and Armored Core 6 are anything to go by, I think they're trying to move on and do some other stuff by now. Looking backwards to look forward kind of thing, which I'm all for. So it's not like I've lost faith in FromSoftware or anything. At the end of the day, they're one of the only studios their size doing stuff I gravitate towards. I can only hope it stays that way for a while longer. Congrats, you made it to the end of the video. Believe it or not, I originally planned for this to be a quick 10-minute thing, but clearly I messed up somewhere. I wanna shout out Illusory Wall, who partly inspired this video with this Twitter thread. Also wanna thank everyone who's ever called me a slur over my Dark Souls opinions. And also thank you for watching. Hopefully next video will be lighter and shorter, but for now I'm gonna go play Dragon's Dogma. See you guys later.